Okay, as requested today, I'm going to put together a little tutorial based on what we did in class today, which is to create a few elements for a little kitchen scene. So here I am in Blender with my default cube. I don't really need that cube. I'm going to create a plate first. So let's delete that. Let's delete that default cube, and instead we are going to use a cylinder to start our plate. So let's create a cylinder. Make sure that our cap fill type is set to triangle fan, and other than that we can just start manipulating this object here. So scale this in the Z-axis until it's really quite small. You don't want to accidentally scale it backwards. I'm going to get a little closer. Scale in the Z-axis until it's quite skinny. And there. Now we'll tap 5 on our number pad to go into an orthographic view and tab into edit mode. Now I want to select this whole edge, so face select mode is going to give me quick access to everything, all the geometry on the edge. So I option click on one of these edges that is perpendicular to the direction I want to select, and I select the whole loop there by holding down option. Okay, so if I'm tap 1 on my keyboard, I now have a perfect side-on front orthographic view. Tap E to extrude, S to scale, and then I'm going to tap Shift Z because I don't really want this getting thicker as it flares out. We'll just scale it out a little bit. Then G to grab in the Z axis, so tap GZ and bring that up there. And that's basically a pie plate at this point. So once again, tap E to extrude, S to scale, Shift Z to avoid scaling in the Z axis. Pull that out a little more. Click, then G to grab in the Z axis, GZ. Bring that up. And that's looking pretty promising. Going to do it probably 2 more times. E to extrude, S to scale, bring it out, Shift Z so that we're not thickening it as we go. Grab in the Z axis and bring that up just a little. We sort of want this there. We want this the walls of this plate going shallower and shallower as it comes out. And finally, I'm going to extrude one more time just to create a little lip around here. E to extrude, S to scale, Shift Z to keep from making it thicker, and there we go. Okay, so there's my plate. Pretty easy to create, pretty straightforward. It's basically modeled at this point. You can see that it is flat shaded. You can see all these facets in here, so I'm going to go over to my Tools menu and click on Smooth Shading for that. That'll kind of help that look out. Now, I should probably have mentioned this earlier. You'll notice I always switch my selection to a left click. So I'm going to go to File and User Preferences. I'll show you where that's at. Here under Input, I always click on this, Select with Left. And that probably is a little bit heretical to some Blender users, but that's the way I like to do it. Under Interface, I also always check Zoom to Mouse Position and Rotate Around Selection. I find those make it easier for me to navigate in Blender. So FYI, if you notice something odd about my settings, that's probably what it is. Now, I also need to switch over to the Cycles renderer because we're about ready to deal with materials. So let's create a plane here to set our plate on top of, and scale this by a factor of 50. Now, if I look from a straight side view here, I can see that my plate's not quite resting on the plane, so grab this in the Z-axis and move it down underneath there so that the plate won't actually be penetrating the table that it's sitting on. It's probably time to start naming objects as well. So if I select my plate, come over here to the object data, instead of cylinder, we'll call this plate. Select the plane. Instead of plane, we'll call this table. Okay, so we've got those objects there. Let's kind of look, and let's change our viewport shading mode to rendered and kind of look and see how things are starting to shape up here. So that's pretty dim. Let's select our lamp over here in the outliner. Go to our lamp tab, and you can see that it's not yet using nodes. I can't adjust the power of it here yet because we've switched to the cycles renderer, and that lamp existed when this scene was a blender render scene. So I need to specifically tell it, let's become a cycles lamp, use nodes. And now I have access to the surface shader for that lamp and the color and the strength, and I'm going to change the strength to, let's try 800 here, kind of brighten things up. And I'm going to change the size of this. I kind of want to widen my shadows out to diffuse the edges of them. So I'm going to put that up to about 4. And that looks fairly nice. Alright, I'm ready to put a material on this plate. So let's click to select the plate. Over here you can see that that is in fact what we have selected. I'm going to split out my view. As I mentioned in class, we're basically going to use the node editor for the creation of materials from now on. So go into the node editor, give myself a little bit of room here, click on new to create a new material. And right away I can start manipulating this material. I can change this to kind of a robin's egg blue if I want. That's kind of a fun color for a plate. But it doesn't really look like much yet because it's just a diffuse color. It's not really reacting to the light in the way that a glass or ceramic plate would. So I'm going to try to make this into kind of a ceramic-y material. I'm going to add a node, so Shift A, add a shader, and let's make that a mix shader and just kind of plug it in there. I need to add a glossy shader to this mix. And that may not look like it made much difference here, but if you start looking down on the edge, you can see things are starting to reflect a little bit. Let's for now, let's take the roughness all the way down. You can see this is really quite reflective here. Especially if I take the mix factor all the way over in favor of reflectivity, then it basically looks like a reflective steel plate. Now the lighting is not very good in this scene yet. We've still just kind of got the one default light. We've brightened it a little, softened it a little, but otherwise, you know, things aren't looking very realistic here yet. Let's take that mix factor back a little bit. And in order to make this material look really nice and ceramic, I need to add kind of the undulating imperfections that a ceramic material has. So the next thing I'm going to do here is add a texture, a noise texture. That's going to generate kind of the bumps for us there. And I need to add, let's see, it's not under color, it's under vector. I need to add a bump node. So basically I'm going to take my color information from this noise texture and plug it into the height value for the bump node. Then take the normal from the bump node and plug it into the normal for the glossy node. And you'll see that right away that's made a difference over here. Things look a little bit different. Not really quite the way we need them to yet. We probably need to increase our scale here so that the size of these undulations and these bumps is a little smaller. And depending on how big you want those, basically this is kind of where you manipulate that. So let's put them maybe about 15. That's probably a good size. Now this looks really, really bumpy, way too bumpy. So I'm going to take the strength in our bump node back down to about maybe 0.25. And that's probably a little bit better. we'll really only know how well that's working once we start seeing objects reflect in this, and once we may need to come back and refine this a little bit. So one further refinement I'm going to make to this plate, while I have this material open here, I am going to tap Z on my keyboard twice to go to wireframe and then to a flat shaded, just solid viewport shading. And I'm going to tab into edit mode and just Control R to make a loop cut right here. That gives me a nice ring of faces around the edge here. I'm going to change the color of this ring just to make this plate a little more decorative. So face select mode, I'm going to option click this entire ring, so I'm going to option click on an edge that is between faces that is perpendicular to the direction I want my selection ring to go. So that would be this. I want my ring to go this way, so I'm going to click on an edge going this way. You can see that that pops up and I've got that ring selected. So over here under materials, I just have my material.001. We'll call this blue ceramic. Need to kind of name those. I'm going to add another material slot here. That's what this plus button does. And I'm going to pull this down and fill that material slot with my blue ceramic material. Now, at this point, I need to make a copy of that material because I don't want the change. I'm going to change the color of this, and right now these are filled with the same material. These are not copies of a material. They are one material filling two different slots. So if I change one, it also changes in the other slot. So I am going to click this little button here, which makes a copy called blue ceramic 01, and I'll call this red ceramic. Now I can come over here, I can see down here in my node editor that red ceramic is in fact the material I'm working with now, and I can just, and actually I'm going to go to a rendered viewport shading mode so that I can see the effect that this has a little better. I can just make that a nice, oh, I can't see it yet because I have to assign this material to these faces that I have selected. So click assign. Now if I go to a rendered viewport, you can see that it is in fact affecting that area. So I can pick a nice deep kind of red color, and we're going to darken it. I want that stripe to be kind of deep and dark red, sort of a nice accent to that canary blue. Okay, and it has the same bump map material and everything that the other does. You can see it's already constructed for me exactly the way I wanted my blue ceramic material. I can tab out of edit mode now. The last thing I'm going to do to this plate, at least before we move on to the rest of the scene, is I'm going to add a subdivision surface modifier. You can see when you zoom in on this that 32 vertices of edges, 32 vertices basically of resolution for this cylinder is not enough to really zoom in on it without it breaking down. So if I add a subdivision surface modifier, that immediately starts to refine and look better there. So there's my plate, and I'm pretty happy with it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a toaster. So let's go back to a solid shaded viewport, and let's make a toaster over here. So a toaster, we'll probably just make that out of a cube. So I've created a cube here. You can see that it is exactly halfway through the ground plane, and since the cube is 2 blender units tall, I can just grab it in Z by with a value of 1 blender unit. So GZ1 on the keyboard, and it will come up exactly on top of our table plane here. So there's my cube, and let's move it out of the middle of the plate. We'll just start scaling this in different axes to make it the right size for a toaster. So scale it in Y toaster is going to be fairly long. Scale it in X. That's kind of a nice toasterish proportion there. And it's probably not tall enough to be a toaster at this point. So I'm going to go into wireframe mode and scale this in the Z-axis a little bit. There we go. Now we'll grab that in Z and bring it up so that once again it's resting on top of our table. Okay, and there's our toaster, at least the start of it. So I want to make this a 2-slot toaster. So just kind of thinking through the topology here, what I want to do is I want to be able to cut 2 slots right in here. So I'm going to do a loop cut and slide, Control R, and just hit escape because I want that to be right in the middle there. So now if I select these 2 faces here, I could try to extrude them downward, but of course that would extrude this whole face, or both of these faces, as if they were one object downward. I want to be able to kind of split them out and extrude them simultaneously, but I want to keep them identical in size. So if I hold down Option E, then I get this extrude menu, and I can say, you know what, I want to extrude the individual faces. And there it has done that. I want to hit escape before I move these. I don't want to commit to any movements here. Now if I come down to my pivot point and change that from the default median point value to individual origins, what that's going to do is when I hit scale now, it's going to basically scale each of these faces according to their individual origins. So scale them down, and I can scale them in the X-axis, and since it was brought up in class that we need to leave a little room for the electronics on the front, I can grab these edges and move them back in the Y-axis, and there we have our 2 faces ready for extrusion downward to create the toaster slots. So once again, I can change my pivot point back to my median point now. That's default. So that's usually the way I expect it to behave. And select these 2 faces by shift clicking and tap E and just bring them downward into the toaster. So let's see how far down they are by looking at a wireframe view, the orthographic viewport. And I can grab these in the Z-axis and bring them down probably farther. There. That's probably a good size slot for a slice of bread. So that's pretty good. The next thing I'm going to do is I need to create a slot on the front of the toaster for the little lever to go up and down. So I'm going to make a loop cut and slide right here because I sort of want, I'm going to want square faces up here later, and you'll see why. We kind of saw why in class. So same thing down at the bottom, Control R. I'm going to kind of rope off an area for this slot to kind of take place here by subdividing this mesh that way. So now I can perform basically the same operation here. Select these 2 faces, extrude, and then scale in the X-axis and just kind of bring those together like this. Make a really skinny slot there, and then extrude those backward into the toaster. Grab in Y to make it a little deeper if I want, and that's a pretty good toaster slot. So I'm happy with that, I think. And now basically the only things we have left to create here are the toaster lever and the control knob, the temperature knob in the front. Those should be pretty easy. But this toaster is obviously pretty blocky, so a lot of toasters, they have some industrial design to them. They're kind of rounded. So I'm going to add a Subdivision surface modifier, which is totally going to ruin this thing for a little while. So there's the Subsurf modifier. I need to probably smooth shade the toaster and that's looking pretty bad. So let's tab into edit mode. And I'm going to click this little button over here on my Subsurf modifier. This basically makes the edit cage adjust to the modifier result, as you can see from the tooltip there. So that shows me a little more with the edges and the vertices and faces what's actually happening with the modifier. So basically I need more geometry to describe what I want happening here. So I'm going to Control R, do a loop cut here, move it all the way toward the front to describe basically the geometry to make these toast slots square. And inside of these slots also I need to add some geometry. Control R and slide that up. And then same kind of thing here, Control R and slide that down. And now my toaster slots, well, on one side, sorry, I've got to do the other side. Slide up, Control R, slide down. Okay, and that's looking better than it was. Still a little bit soft up here. If I option click this, let's make sure it's slid all the way down. Control E gives me the edge menu from which I can once again pick the edge slide behavior, and that's actually, it is happening, so that's probably okay. So if I want these edges to become sharper, I probably need to make my cuts along the outer edge, basically loop cut up here, and then there we go. So that's looking a little better. Now this looks pretty sad, so let's make a loop cut here, Control R and slide that down, loop cut here and slide it up. Whoop, not quite that far. You can see the normals kind of rebelled there for a second. Control R, slide down, Control R, slide up. Okay, and that's getting closer to what we need to happen. Let's refine the inside of this little area here. There we go. Control R, slide out. Control R, slide in. So that's squaring off a little better there. And we can probably do a loop there. There we go. So now the bottom of this is probably way too rounded. So let's give ourselves a loop down there. And that's a better toaster. So you can see there's a little bit of rounding to the edges. We could actually come in here and kind of adjust this, you know, to be a little bit more of a designed looking toaster. For instance, let's do it while we're here, right? So I'm just going to grab these kind of top sets of vertices. Go into a top view and scale these in, but I'm going to hold down or tap Shift Z on the keyboard so that I'm not shrinking the size of this in the Z axis. And let's just see kind of what that looks like. And actually I don't like it, so undo, and I'm going to option shift click to unselect. Holy cow. To unselect that bottom loop there. Now let's scale Shift Z and kind of bring it in a little better. You know, I might just select this top loop. Let's try that. Scale, bring it in. There, that's a little bit better. I like that. Okay, so there's our toaster, and next we probably need to form the little lever. I'm going to create that as a separate object, so I'm just going to create a cube, We'll shrink it way down, grab in the Z-axis, come to our front view, kind of line that up where we want it. Scale in the X-axis, scale in the Z-axis. That's probably good. Now, from our right viewport, we will grab it in the Y-axis and bring it out where we need it. And I will do a quick loop cut and slide operation here just to allow me to kind of stylize this really fast. Okay, so there's our lever. Let's name that toaster lever. This toaster is still called cube, so let's call that toaster. And I totally just put that lever on the wrong side. So rotate in the Z-axis by 180 degrees. We'll turn it around and we will bring it down in the Y-axis. QED. And let's see, I've got a little wrinkle here in my toaster, haven't I? Yes, I do. So I need to option click to select one of those loops and bring it down a little bit. That's not behaving quite the way it should. Let's adjust these. That's the Subsurf modifier being a little squirrely. And let's see. Having the Z-axis. There we go. Alright, that's better. So basically we were creating a wrinkle by putting some edges too close together there. And I'm going to move this in the Z-axis so that it's down. Alright, and last toaster part, let's create the knob for the toaster. So I'm going to create a cylinder. It's going to be pretty small, so I don't need this much resolution. I'm going to take it down to 16 vertices, and instead of a triangle fan cap fill type, I'm going to choose nothing. Then I'm just going to scale this down, grab in the Z-axis, grab in X and bring it over where we want it, grab in X, rotate in X by 90 degrees, so that's kind of facing the right way. Grab in Y and bring it out to the front, grab in Z, and whoop, that seems a little small, so let's scale it in every axis except Y, so S, Shift Y, and just kind of bring it up to size there, because it's about the depth I want. Okay, and the reason I didn't do a cap fill is that I wanted to be able to fill this end with faces after this manner. Just basically faces going straight across the front of it so that I can extrude two of them to make kind of the handle part of the knob. Okay, so now I can just grab two of these faces and extrude them out, and that makes the knob fairly realistic. So there's our knob. I'm going to smooth shade that, and I probably don't need to smooth shade the lever. Alright, so let's make some materials for these. I'm going to switch to a, oh, you know what, we need to name this, so let's call it toaster knob. And I'm going to create a new material over here. We'll name it black plastic. And that's pretty easy to make. Basically, we turn our diffuse color black. We add a mix shader, and we add a glossy shader. And now let's look at our rendered viewport and just kind of see how that looks. And that might be a little more gloss than we need. So let's push the factor toward the diffuse shader. And that looks pretty good. So now if we select the toaster lever, come over here to materials, we can assign the black plastic material to that as well. Alright, for the toaster, we need to make a metallic material, so let's just call this toaster. And basically, instead of a diffuse shader, what we really need here, and we can change this out over here a little bit more easily, we just need a glossy shader basically, and that is currently perfectly reflective because it has a roughness of 0. So let's increase the roughness there a little because our toaster is probably not likely to actually have a perfect mirror surface. Okay, so that's looking a little better. Let's make some heating elements for the toaster finally. Go back to a solid shaded viewport and maybe look at it from a side view. You can kind of see the toast slots here. So I'm going to create, I'm just going to grab a cube here and scale it way down. Grabbing the Z-axis, grabbing Y, and just kind of line it up here, scale in the Y-axis, and just give myself basically a really basic toaster element here. Grabbing Y, and let's scale this in the Y-axis. Okay, and let's make sure, let's get this lined up from side to side, grabbing the X-axis and kind of put it in there. Okay, so if you look inside now, you see it. Let's get that even skinnier. So scale, and then I'm going to say Shift Y because I don't want to scale this down in the Y-axis at all. It's the right length for me. Actually, we might even scale it a little bigger in Y. There we go. Just kind of line that up there. So go back to our side view, and from here, let's name this object. We'll call this heating wire. And I'm going to tab into edit mode and Control R to loop, cut, and slide. But if I increase the number, if I scroll up and down with the scroll wheel on my mouse, I increase the number of cuts that I'm making. So let's cut just like that, and then hit escape. I don't want to position them. So now if I tap C, I can deselect every other one of these. And I need to select, just that end. Okay, so I have every other segment selected, and now if I just grab these in the Z-axis, I can kind of make this be a bit of a squiggly line. And in order to make it kind of a curvy squiggly line, we'll add a Subsurf modifier to it. And tab back into edit mode and grab in the Z-axis and sort of exaggerate the look of that. Increase the subdivisions a little bit. There we go. So that's a nice squiggly line. And currently it looks a little too long in the Y-axis, so let's scale that down there, grab in Z, and you know what? The Subsurf modifier is making it so that one end of this is higher than the other. I think I'm going to undo everything I've done really quick, and I am going to add one more segment to this via extrusion. So I'm going to turn off the Subsurf modifier and basically just eyeball and extrude one more segment so that I can end both sides on an up or a down depending on what I choose. So box select, and we'll select every other segment here. You can see now I have both ends selected. Grab that in the Z-axis, turn our Subsurf modifier back on so we can see kind of what's happening here. And that looks better. So if I don't want my ends to be pointed like this, I basically just need to add a little more geometry. So a loop cut and slide here, going all the way to the end. Same thing on the other side. Loop cut and slide, and then the ends round out instead of being pointed like that. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to scale it in Y a little bit so that it fits where it's supposed to go. Grab in the Y axis and kind of position things in. So let's see. Scale in Y. Let's stretch it out a little. Grab in Y. Just kind of scaling and moving here until things look the way I want. Okay, so we've got that. Let's put a material on it. And this material, let's go to a rendered viewport here. This material is going to emit a red light. So that'll be kind of fun. We'll make a new material over here, and instead of diffuse, we just change it to emission and change the color to a nice sort of hot orangey red. Maybe turn the strength up a little. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to move this in the X-axis so it's just a little closer to the wall of the toaster. There. So we've got one heating coil kind of working now. And using the array modifier in Blender, it's really easy to kind of make the rest of those. So let's come down here, and yeah, I'm going to stay in my wireframe shaded mode actually so I can see through things. So if I come back over to the modifier stack, I can put a new modifier in here. This one's called array. And you can see that it actually just made a second coil right next to the first one. That's not really what I want to do. So you've got three axes that you can put a copy in, and that's X, Y, and Z. And of course I want the next coil to be down below this one, so that's the Z axis. So let's change the offset to 0 in X, and let's start turning the offset not up but down, I guess, in Z. So that made a copy of our coil. Let's change the count from 2 to, let's see, there's 6 coils, and I can probably increase the offset just a little bit. I'll hold down Shift so that my adjustments are pretty small here. And that's a pretty good set of coils there. So we've got 6 coils inside of our toaster. If we go back to our rendered viewport, you can look down inside of it and see those coils at work on the side there. That's what the array modifier does, is it basically copies in a geometric way. So let's put some coils on the other side. So in order to do that, the way the modifier stack works over here is the top modifier gets applied first. So that's our Subsurf modifier. Great. What that means is that all of the other copies made by this second modifier, the array modifier, all the copies of this coil also look like they have a Subsurf modifier on them. So if you were to swap these places, then the others are acting a little bit differently here. Actually, it looks like they still have a Subsurf modifier on them, but so apparently I don't understand that quite perfectly, but basically the first one gets applied first. So we've got a second array modifier here. So if we add another array modifier, then we do in fact want this one to go in the x-axis. We just want it to go a little farther than it is currently. So it's copying all 6 of our heating wires there. So it just copies straight across. And so that's pretty good. Now I could tell this, you know what, let's make 4 copies instead of 2, but, oh, and actually that lined up pretty darn close, but not quite close enough. One set of wires is sort of most of the way into this wall, so rather than do that, we will make yet another array modifier, and this one, since it is below the modifier that copied our wires across this gap, is going to basically copy a set of 2 array modifiers. And again, that's, whoop, I'm adjusting the wrong parameter. Let's say 2. So if we move this now, we're moving a set of 2 of these. So let me hold down Shift so that my adjustments are relatively small, and we'll just kind of position these in there. Alright, and we now have a full set of coils all the way through this toaster. And we've really only had to model 1. So if I now look at a rendered viewport, you can see that that really looks like it's blazing away. It needs some bread in there. Maybe we'll get to that eventually, but alright, so, and it's actually emitting light, which is kind of fun. So the last thing we're going to do is we're going to create a glass in here so that I can demonstrate the glass material one more time. And that's probably the easiest part of this entire tutorial. So let's make a new object. We'll move back to our solid shaded viewport, and we'll just create a cylinder here. This time we do want our cap fill type to be a triangle fan. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly since I went through it in the previous tutorial. I'm going to move my vertices back to 32. We want some resolution on this. And grab this in the Z-axis and just basically start moving it around. We're going to make kind of a nice cup object here. So grab that in Z until it's moving up. Alright, so now tap C to circle select, and let's get our faces selected here. And extrude, E to extrude, S to scale, bring that down, up, E to extrude downward. Let's look through it, scale, or grab in Z. Okay, there's basically our cup. And in fact, let's name that cup. Okay, and we will, I'll smooth shade it in a minute. So let's add a material to the cup. I'm going to go back to a rendered viewport, and let's make a new material here. So our new material, we're going to make this glass. So we don't need a diffuse channel at all. We basically just need a mix, shader, mix, and within that mix we need refraction and glossy, which is kind of what Blender calls reflection. So we'll plug those both in, and that makes our material start kind of behaving a little like glass. You can see it is somewhat transparent here, but basically light just comes through partially and light reflects partially, kind of in a mirror-like way. So we talked a little bit about the Fresnel effect in the last tutorial. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about that again, but if I add an input, a Fresnel input node, then the index of refraction for glass is about 1.45, so this by default is about correct. I can just take the factor from this Fresnel node and plug it into the factor for the mix shader, and then this behaves like glass actually would. Okay, so having said that, we still have some problems with this particular material, in that we really need to smooth shade it. That'll help somewhat. And we also need to give it a Subsurf modifier, because otherwise things really aren't... Oh, whoops, our roughness is way up. Let's turn that down. Otherwise these jaggies are going to be kind of a problem. So add a Subdivision Surface Modifier, and of course that curls everything, even the things that should be straight. So if we go back to our solid shaded viewport, tab into edit mode, just do a couple of loop cuts here to sort of remind Blender of where we want the geometry to be sharp. Then, okay, I can see that that loop is going to be inside, so I click and move it up. And then same thing for the bottom. Click and move it down. And that should act a lot more like a glass cup. Okay, and you can see we've got some reflection there. We're not seeing through it an awful lot right now because, you know what? I've got my glossy and my refraction shaders plugged in backwards. So let's switch that around. Okay, there we go. And that's behaving like glass. You can see it's even refracting, it's magnifying in places. If I want to color the glass, I can just color the refraction. You know, so we can make that sort of a nice green to be a counterpoint to the glowing red inside of the toaster. And that looks pretty nice. So let's light this scene up a little better, shall we? Let's click on the lamp and go to our lamp data. And I'm going to increase the power of that lamp to about 2500. You know what, maybe even more, 3500. And that looks a little better. And now let's move that lamp up so that it's kind of covering the scene a little better. Let's see. Oh, that's a point lamp. Let's also make it an area lamp so we can kind of point it the direction that we want it to go. We don't want it right behind the camera. We want the camera to be able to see some shadows, and I might duplicate it so that there's a little bit more light coming from back here. Okay, let's see kind of what that looks like. Let's move our camera around. Take a 3D view here and look at it from the top. Move our camera so that we can see things a little bit better. And we can't see the cup at all there. Matter of fact, let's just move our camera over to kind of the angle that we were working from here. Okay, and let's see what that looks like in a rendered viewport. Okay, so pretty quick, but not bad. It looks like our materials are working, and I hope that helps to internalize what we did today in class. Good luck.